Today, we're going to dive into a pivotal moment in history. It's the story of how a single rumor about a new piece of technology managed to ignite a massive conflict that would change an entire subcontinent forever.
I mean, it sounds almost unbelievable, right? How could one little piece of military hardware cause such a huge and violent uprising? Well, that's the central question we're going to unpack. And to really get it, we first have to understand who was in charge at the time.
So, get this. By the mid-1800s, India wasn't actually ruled by the British government. Instead, a massive British trading group, the East India Company, had become the real power in the region. And this private company had its very own private army to protect its business and control its territory.
The soldiers who made up the bulk of this army were local Indian men. They were known as sepoys. Now, these weren't just random guys with guns. They were trained in modern European warfare and were the absolute backbone of the company's military, all serving under British officers. But there was a big problem brewing just under the surface. A lot of tension was building. Many of the sepoys felt like their British officers were completely disrespecting their cultural and religious beliefs. And at the same time, people all across India were getting worried that their entire way of life was being threatened by this foreign company's growing power. All of that simmering tension was like a powder keg just waiting for a spark. And that spark came from a surprising place, a brand new piece of military technology. It was a new rifle that had a very, very particular way of being loaded. Okay, so this was the pattern 1853 Enfield rifle. To load it, a soldier had to follow these 3 steps. But it was that first step that was the real problem. They had to physically bite open a paper cartridge that was coated in grease. And pretty soon, a rumor started spreading like wildfire about what was actually in that grease. And this is the absolute crucial point. The rumor created a huge religious crisis for just about every sepoy. The grease was said to be made from a mix of beef and pork fat. For Hindu soldiers who believe cows are sacred, this was just unthinkable. And for Muslim soldiers who consider pigs to be unclean, it was an equally forbidden act. Forcing them to put this in their mouths was seen as a direct attack on their faith. Now, British officers tried to deny the rumors, of course, but it was too late. Trust had completely broken down. So what started as a protest against these cartridges quickly, and I mean quickly, exploded into a full-scale armed rebellion. The escalation was incredibly fast. On May 10th, in a town called Meerut, some sepoys who refused the cartridges were publicly humiliated and thrown in jail. While their comrades were outraged. They revolted, freed the prisoners, and attacked the British. By the very next day, they had marched all the way to the ancient city of Delhi, captured it, and found a symbolic leader in the last heir of the old Mughal Empire. With Delhi as a new center of operations, the rebellion just intensified and spread like wildfire across northern India. It turned into a brutal war, full of long, desperate sieges, incredibly fierce battles, and the rise of some new and pretty unexpected leaders. I mean, places like Kanpur saw these horrific massacres that just fueled a terrible cycle of revenge. Meanwhile, at Lucknow, a small British group held out for months. And this wasn't just soldiers fighting anymore. You had landowners, peasants, and local princes all joining the rebellion, each with their own reasons to fight. And out of this chaos, one of the rebellion's most legendary leaders emerged, Lakshmi Bai, the Rani, or queen, of a kingdom called Jhansi. She was a young ruler who decided to join the fight after the British tried to take her kingdom away from her adopted son. And listen, she wasn't just some symbolic figurehead. She was a brilliant military commander who actually led her own troops into battle. In fact, one of the top British generals who fought against her called her the most dangerous of all the insurgent leaders. Her story is a really powerful reminder that this was a fight for land and power too, not just about the cartridges. Now, the initial shock of the rebellion definitely caught the British off guard. But they responded with absolutely overwhelming force. The East India Company and the British government launched a massive, organized, and pretty brutal counterattack to crush the uprising once and for all. We're talking about tens of thousands of professional soldiers being sent all the way from Britain. They had better weapons, including modern artillery, and they had a key technological advantage, the telegraph. It allowed them to coordinate their attacks way faster than the rebels could. The fighting was incredibly fierce, with both sides committing just terrible acts of violence. After the rebellion was finally put down, the British government decided that a massive change was needed. They came to the conclusion that a private company could no longer be trusted to run India.
So, in 1858, they completely abolished the East India Company and put India under the direct rule of the British Crown. This was the beginning of the era known as the British Raj. So, even though the rebellion failed in its goal to drive the British out, it left this deep and lasting legacy that would really go on to shape the future of India for the next century. On a social level, the trust between the British and Indians was just completely shattered. The relationship became one of deep suspicion and fear, and it led to way more racial segregation, with the British really separating themselves from the local population. The military was also completely reorganized with one goal in mind: to prevent another rebellion from ever happening again. The number of Indian soldiers was reduced, while the number of British soldiers was increased. And crucially, the most powerful weapons like artillery were kept almost exclusively in British hands. So we end where we began, with a question. For years, the British called it the Sepoy Mutiny, which frames it as just a military insurrection that failed. But many people in India today call it the First War of Independence, the moment a nation really began to fight for its freedom. How we name an event completely changes how we remember it, right? So what do you think is the true legacy of 1857?